The word vigil doesn't actually mean a prayer. I spent a long time looking into this for near-death experiences, tracing it back to the Latin vigilia. It literally translates to wakefulness or a watch. It was a military term first. It was about the men who stayed upright and alert while the rest of the camp was vulnerable. I'm Zeke, and I found something in the account I received a few weeks ago that hasn't let me go. It's from a man named Arthur. He was a high-level executive in Chicago, a man who understood oversight, strategy, and what it meant to keep a watch over a multi-million-dollar enterprise. I've been reading through his description of what happened on a balcony overlooking the Lake Michigan shoreline. It's not a story about rest, it's a story about the cost of falling asleep when you're the one assigned to the watch. Arthur didn't start his account at the beginning. He started it where the air changed. 90 seconds. That's all the time he says it took for the city he'd helped build to turn into something he didn't recognize. The shadows weren't just dark. They were active. I was looking at the Willis Tower, and the glass wasn't reflecting the sunset anymore. It was flickering, like thousands of predatory eyes opening and closing all at once. I could see the blackness crawling up the side of the steel, moving like a liquid stain that had figured out how to climb. Look, I don't know how to tell you this without sounding like I've lost my mind. My hands are shaking just thinking about the color of that dark. It wasn't a shadow. It was a weight. 5 minutes before that, I was fine. I was Arthur. I was 59 years old, standing on the 62nd floor of my Gold Coast high-rise with a glass of 16-year-old Lagavulin in my hand. The ice was clinking against the crystal. I remember that sound. It was the last normal thing. I was looking at a merger deal on my phone. Market share, competitive advantages. That was my world. I had oversight of 3,000 employees and a footprint in 4 different time zones. I thought I knew what power looked like. Then my chest didn't just hurt, it clamped. It was like a massive, invisible hand had reached through my ribs and decided to squeeze. I couldn't swallow. My mouth it stopped working. I felt the glass of scotch slip. I didn't try to catch it. I just watched it hit the outdoor rug, and the amber liquid soaked into the fibers. And I thought, that's a shame. That was expensive. My knees hit the concrete. The railing was cold. My fingers locked around the metal bars like they'd fused there. I was gasping, but the air felt like it was made of lead. I looked back out at the city. The Chicago I knew. The grid, the lights of Wacker Drive, the traffic moving like blood through the streets. It started to peel away. The lights on the Magnificent Mile didn't look like street lamps anymore. They looked like small, flickering candles in a hurricane. And the darkness between the buildings, it was teeming. I saw these shapes, these things like smoke but with intention, weaving through the alleys. I tried to call out. My throat was dry. My heart gave one last jagged kick against my ribs, and then nothing. The silence wasn't quiet. It was heavy. I wasn't on the balcony anymore, but I wasn't gone either. I was hovering. I could see my own body, slumped against the railing, my expensive suit jacket bunched up around my shoulders. I looked small. I looked like a discarded piece of equipment. But the city was alive in a way that made my skin crawl. I saw a grid, not the one the Department of Transportation mapped out. This was a grid of light and rot. I saw streaks of brilliant gold light connecting certain houses, certain office buildings. But then I saw the gray. The gray was everywhere. It was like a fungus growing over the doorways of the banks I'd done business with. It was thickest over the places where people were supposed to be safe. I saw a man in a penthouse 3 blocks over. He was sleeping, but there was something standing over him. It was a shadow that had no face, and it was leaning down, whispering into his ear. Every time it whispered, a little more of that gray rot would spread across the room. I felt this, my chest felt like it was being pulled toward the center of the lake. Who's in charge of this? I said it out loud. Or I thought it. My voice sounded different. It didn't have the executive bark I was used to. It sounded thin. Then, the air behind me didn't just get warm. It got solid. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. But I felt a hand land on my right shoulder. It was heavier than the cardiac arrest, but it didn't hurt. It felt like someone had laid a slab of sun-warmed marble on me. You always wanted the top-down view, Arthur. The voice didn't come through my ears. It arrived in my gut. It was a voice that sounded like it had been speaking since before the foundations of the loop were poured. I started to turn. My legs felt like they were made of water. I looked, and the man standing there didn't have a robe. He didn't have a beard like the Sunday school books. He was wearing something simple. But the light coming off him was so intense, I had to put my hand up to my face. My hand. I looked at it. It was translucent. I could see the flickering lights of the city through my own palm. "Look at the watchman," he said. He pointed down toward the suburbs, away from the skyscrapers. I saw a house, a tiny brick bungalow. In the living room, a woman was sitting up on a couch. It was 2 a.m. She had a Bible open, but she was nodding off. Her head would drop, and then she'd snap it back up, rubbing her eyes. Every time she snapped back to attention, the gold light around her house would flare up, pushing back the gray smoke that was trying to seep through the window frames. "She's tired," I whispered. "She is," the man said. His voice was full of something I can't name. It wasn't pity, it was gravity. But she's the only reason that household hasn't been liquidated. Liquidated. He used my word, my professional term. I looked back at the woman. She groaned, rubbed her face, and stood up to pace the floor, praying under her breath. "I wake them, Arthur. I stir them when the enemy is most active. But look." He shifted his hand, and we were suddenly over a different neighborhood. I saw a father, his phone on the nightstand. The screen lit up. A notification? No. It was just a nudge. I could feel the Holy Spirit. I knew it was him, just tapping the man's soul. "Wake up. Pray for your daughter." The man groaned. He looked at the clock. 3:14 a.m. He rolled over. He pulled the duvet higher. The moment he closed his eyes, the shadows that had been hovering at the edge of the property line didn't just move. They lunged. I watched those shadows move through the father's bedroom wall like it was made of smoke. They didn't have faces, but they had posture. They looked like consultants. That's the only way I can put it. They moved with a cold, terrifying efficiency. One of them went straight for the man's head, and the other hovered near the doorway where I knew his daughter's room was. "They're late stage," I said. My voice was raspy, like I'd been screaming for hours, even though I hadn't made a sound. The man beside me, Jesus, didn't look away from the house. "The enemy doesn't miss his meetings, Arthur." I put my hands to my temples. My skin felt like cold plastic. I've spent 30 years sitting in boardrooms, looking at risk assessments and hostile takeovers. I thought I knew what an enemy was. It was a competitor. It was a market dip. "But he's just sleeping," I whispered. I was thinking about all the times I'd hit the snooze button at 3 a.m., all the times I'd ignored that weird, heavy feeling in my chest that told me to get up and just sit in the quiet. "Sleep is a legal loophole," Jesus said. I didn't understand that. I thought he was talking about contracts, about some kind of fine print I'd missed. "A sleeping man cannot defend his borders," he continued. My stomach dropped. It was the same feeling I got when an audit went south. I looked at the man's house again. The gold light was dimming. It was like the power grid was failing. "I wake them so they can sign the injunction," Jesus said. His eyes were on me then. They weren't soft. They were intense, like he was looking at a balance sheet that didn't add up, and he was waiting for me to explain the deficit. "Their prayers are the authority I use to block the entry," he said. I looked down at my own hands. I could see the city streets through my knuckles. "Why don't you just do it?" I asked. I felt a sudden sharp anger. It was the way I talked to my VPs when they brought me a problem instead of a solution. "If you're the CEO of all this, why do you need a tired guy in the suburbs to wake up?" Jesus didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. "I gave the lease to the children of men," he said. The word lease hit me like a physical blow. I understood leases. I understood ownership versus occupancy. "I don't violate my own contracts," he added. I looked back at the city. I started to see the hierarchy. It wasn't just random shadows, it was a structure. I saw things that looked like regional directors of darkness sitting on top of the skyscrapers in the loop. They were coordinating the rot. They were sending signals down into the courtrooms, the hospitals, the trading floors. I saw a shadow standing in the hallway of my own firm on Wacker Drive. It was leaning against the mahogany door of my private office. "That's my floor," I said. I tried to move toward it, but I was pinned to the air. "You were the watchman there, Arthur," Jesus said. I felt a cold sweat break out across my back, even though I didn't have a body. I just ran the company, I said. I was reaching for my old self, my title, my standing. I made sure the quarterlies were up. I made sure people got their bonuses. And while you were doing that, Jesus said, pointing toward my office, what was being whispered into your lead negotiator's ear? I looked. I saw a shadow hunched over the desk of my best friend, Bill. Bill was a good man, but in the vision I saw him writing a memo that I knew was a lie. It was a compromise that would destroy a smaller company we were acquiring. Bill wouldn't do that, I said. But I knew he would. I'd seen the memo. I'd signed it. The rot enters in the quiet hours, Jesus said, when the ones with authority are too busy resting to notice the breach. I've been sitting with this detail about the lease since I first read Arthur's account. It's a very specific way of framing the relationship between the physical and the spiritual. Arthur sees the world as a series of contracts and organizational charts because that's how his mind was trained. I noticed that when Jesus speaks to him, he doesn't change Arthur's vocabulary, he uses it. He meets Arthur right at the intersection of Whacker Drive and whatever we call the afterlife. It makes me wonder if we all see the same thing when we cross over, or if the grid looks different depending on who's looking. I couldn't look at my office anymore. I turned my head, but everywhere I looked, I saw the same pattern. It was a massive, living organization of despair. The scale of it, I can't describe the scale. It was like looking at the global economy, but instead of currency, the medium of exchange was fear. How do we stop it? I asked. My voice was smaller now. I felt like a first-year intern who just realized he was way out of his depth. You don't stop it, Arthur, Jesus said. I felt a jolt of panic. If he wasn't going to stop it, then what was the point of any of this? You occupy, he said. I shook my head. I didn't have the words. I was reaching for something to hold on to, something that felt like the solid ground of my old life. I am teaching you the 3 shifts, Jesus said. Suddenly, the city didn't just look like a grid. It looked like a clock. The air around us began to pulse. It was rhythmic, like a giant invisible heart was beating underneath the pavement of the city. The first watch is the hour of the sifting, he said. We moved. It wasn't like flying. It was like the world shifted around us. We were standing on the shoreline of Lake Michigan, but the water wasn't blue. It was black, and it was churning with a violence that didn't match the wind. Look at the clock, Jesus said. I looked up. In the sky above the lake, I didn't see the moon. I saw a massive glowing dial. The hand was just touching 11 p.m. This is when the assignments are handed out, Jesus said. I saw figures emerging from the dark water. They were carrying scrolls, not physical paper, but ideas. They were carrying intentions. They were moving toward the city like an invading army that knew exactly where the weak points in the wall were. One of my apostles didn't understand this watch, Jesus said. He thought his own strength was enough to maintain his position. I thought about my own strength. I thought about my gym routine, my 5-year plans, my carefully managed reputation. Peter found out that strength is useless when the sifting begins, Jesus said. He reached out and touched the air in front of me. The scene changed. I wasn't at the lake anymore. I was standing on a dusty shore. I could smell charcoal and fish. I saw a man weeping, his face buried in his hands. He looked broken. He looked like I felt when the doctor told me my heart had stopped. I taught him a prayer for this hour, Jesus said, and I am giving it to you. The man by the charcoal fire didn't look like an apostle. He looked like a guy who just lost his entire pension in a market crash. He was shuddering. I could hear the breath rattling in his chest, a wet, desperate sound that I recognized from my own lungs just minutes ago on that balcony. Jesus put a hand on the man's head. Peter didn't know the enemy had filed for a sifting, Jesus said. I blinked. Filed for a sifting. It sounded like a legal motion, a petition to the court. The enemy wants to prove the asset has no value, Jesus continued. I looked at Peter. He didn't look like an asset. He looked like a liability. He looked like someone I'd fire without a second thought because he was too emotionally compromised to function. I prayed for him, Jesus said, that his faith wouldn't fail, but I also taught him how to lock the door. The scene shifted. The sand under my feet turned back into the gray, cold air above Whacker Drive. The spiritual clock in the sky was vibrating. 11:14 p.m. The 11 o'clock watch is the hour of the covering, Jesus told me. I saw the smoke again, those liquid black figures moving toward a penthouse on the near north side. I knew who lived there. It was a man named Gregory, a ruthless developer who'd been trying to squeeze out a low-income housing project for 6 months. Watch the deal, Jesus said. We were inside the penthouse. Gregory was fast asleep, but on his designer coffee table, there was a demonic entity. It didn't have a pitchfork. It looked like a vulture made of oil. It was hunched over Gregory's laptop, and it was exhaling a thin, gray mist into the room. "It's planting the terms," Jesus whispered. I saw Gregory stir. He wasn't waking up, but his brow furrowed. I could see his thoughts. He was thinking about a loophole. He was thinking about how to break a contract that would put 300 families on the street. "Father in heaven," Jesus began, and I realized he was dictating the prayer to me. "As the night covers the city, let your light cover the soul of this enterprise." I felt my heart, or whatever I had now, jump, the soul of the enterprise. "Tell them to pray this, Arthur. I confess that the enemy seeks to sift me, but you have prayed for me. Guard my mind from the lies of the compromise. Guard my heart from the deception of the gain." I tried to remember the words. I wanted to write them down. I felt this frantic need for a legal pad. "Tell them to declare that no weapon formed against their household, their business, or their peace will prosper," Jesus said. I watched the vulture thing on the coffee table. It shrieked. The sound was like metal grinding on metal. It looked up, sensing the prayer, even though Gregory wasn't the one saying it. "Who is praying?" I asked. 3 miles away, Jesus said. The view zoomed. I saw an elderly woman in a nightcoat. She was standing in her kitchen in Cicero, holding a cup of lukewarm tea. She didn't know Gregory. She didn't know anything about real estate, but she'd felt a nudge to pray for the leaders of the city. As she spoke the words Jesus was telling me, a streak of gold light shot across the Chicago skyline. It hit Gregory's penthouse like a security breach alarm. The vulture thing scrambled. It didn't just leave. It evaporated. Gregory's face relaxed. The thought of the loophole vanished. "She just saved 300 families," I whispered. I felt a lump in my throat that I couldn't swallow. My hands were gripped tight at my sides. "She exercised her authority over the 11 p.m. assignment," Jesus said. "She canceled the contract before the ink was dry." I've been reading a lot of these accounts over the years for near-death experiences, but I've never heard someone describe a prayer as a security breach for the other side. Arthur's focus on the legality of it, the filed motions and canceled contracts, it makes me wonder about those times I've woken up at 11:30 at night with a name on my mind. I usually just check my phone and go back to sleep. I'm curious, have you ever had that happen? That sudden, heavy sense that you need to be alert for someone, even if you don't know why? If that's landed for you, share it with Zeke in the comments. I read every one. I want to know if Arthur is the only one seeing the city this way. The gold light from the woman's kitchen started to fade as she sat back down, but the air around us didn't get lighter. It got thicker. The spiritual clock in the sky clicked. 12:01 a.m. defined shapes. They were taller. They moved with a military cadence now. I saw them gathering at the intersections of the main streets. "The midnight watch," Jesus said. His voice had lost the warmth it had when he was looking at the woman in Cicero. Now it sounded like a general on the eve of a massive deployment. "This is the hour of the breach," he said. I looked down at the magnificent mile. The luxury stores, the hotels, the tourists who were still out walking. I saw a group of college kids laughing coming out of a bar. They didn't see the entities standing on the corners, watching them like wolves at a fence. "The enemy targets the gates at midnight," Jesus said. I thought about the gates of the city. I thought about the bridges over the Chicago River. "Not those gates, Arthur," Jesus said. He touched my chest. "The gates of the eyes, the gates of the ears, the gates of the subconscious." I felt a wave of nausea. I remembered James, the apostle. I saw a brief flash of him, standing in a dark room, his eyes wide with a kind of terror that makes your blood go cold. He saw the intensity of the midnight hour, Jesus said, and I had to teach him how to bind the assignment. We were moving again, fast. The city lights became long, blurred streaks of neon. We stopped over a house in a quiet neighborhood. A teenager was in her bed, her phone glowing in the dark. She was scrolling. "Look at the feed," Jesus said. I looked. Behind the screen, I saw a shadow. It was weaving images into her mind. Images of worthlessness, images of a body that wasn't right, images of a future that ended in a dark room with a bottle of pills. "She's wide awake," I said. "Why isn't she praying?" "She doesn't know she's at war," Jesus said. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw a flicker of that cracking I'd been feeling in myself. His eyes were full of a grief so heavy it felt like it could pull the skyscrapers down. "Her mother is in the next room," Jesus said. "I've been nudging her for 20 minutes. I've been stirring her spirit to get up and stand at the gate." I looked through the wall. The mother was restless. She was tossing and turning. She checked her alarm clock, 12:42 a.m. "I have a meeting at 9, the woman whispered to the empty room. She rolled over and stuffed the pillow under her ear. The moment she chose the pillow, the shadow over the daughter's bed grew 6 inches taller. It leaned down, and the whisper became a roar that only the girl's soul could hear. "Lord, wake her up!" I shouted. I was reaching for the woman, trying to shake her, but my hands just passed through the air like mist. "I did," Jesus said. He didn't move. He just watched. "If the watchman chooses the sleep of comfort over the sleep of rest," Jesus said, "the gate remains open." I felt a tear run down my face. I didn't know I could cry in this state. It felt like hot lead on my translucent skin. "Teach me the midnight prayer," I rasped. "Please." The air didn't just get heavy. It got thick. It felt like someone had dropped a wet wool blanket over my head, soaking into my very thoughts. I've worked 48-hour stretches during mergers. I've lived on espresso and adrenaline. I know what tired feels like. This wasn't tired. This was a system shutdown. "You feel it, don't you?" Jesus asked. He wasn't affected. He stood there like a pillar of heat, but I was drooping. I felt like my translucent legs were going to give out. My mind was drifting toward the idea of a dark, quiet room. Just for a second. Just to rest. "It's an insider threat, Arthur," Jesus said. I snapped my head up. Insider threat. That's what we call it when a disgruntled employee sabotages the network from the within. "The enemy sends a spirit of slumber to the watchman," Jesus said. "The moment I nudge a soul to pray, he sends the countermeasure. He tries to make the prayer feel like an impossible task." I looked back at the woman in the next room, the mother. She was snoring now. But in the spirit realm, I saw a gray vapor pouring out of the vents in her ceiling, curling around her head like a snake. It wasn't natural sleep. It was an anesthetic. "He's terrified of the midnight prayer," Jesus said. He leaned in close. I could smell something like ozone and cedar. "Lord Jesus Christ," he began, and the words felt like they were being carved into my ribs. "You are the light that shines in the darkness. At this midnight hour, I call upon your name. I bind every demonic assignment released against this house. I loose your protection over every entry point, the doors, the windows, the mines." I repeated the words. My voice felt like it was coming from a mile away. "Tell them to pray this between midnight and 3 a.m., Jesus said. "Tell them to cancel every nightmare and every fear, because I give my beloved rest, but the enemy only gives them chains." The clock in the sky hit 2:45 a.m. The city below us seemed to groan. The rot I'd seen earlier, the gray fungus, it was pulsating now, it was at its peak. I saw it concentrated over the Cook County Jail and the emergency rooms at Northwestern Memorial. It was a feeding frenzy. I saw shadows moving through the hospital corridors, leaning over the beds of people who were already struggling for breath. They were whispering the same thing over and over. "Give up. It's over. No one is coming." "Why aren't the watchmen awake?" I yelled. I was shaking. The cracking in me was complete. I wasn't an executive anymore. I was a man watching a city burn in slow motion. "Some are," Jesus said. He pointed toward a small, darkened window in a high-rise not far from mine. I saw a man kneeling by a bed. He wasn't even a religious guy. He was a janitor I'd seen a dozen times in my building. He was whispering the midnight prayer. Every time he said, "I bind," a shockwave of gold light hit the hospital 3 blocks away. I saw the shadows in the ER flinch. I saw a nurse suddenly stop, take a deep breath, and feel a surge of energy she couldn't explain. "One man," Jesus said. "One man who didn't choose the blanket." I was going back through the comments on a video we did last year. I think it was the one titled The 3 a.m. Wall. And a user named Steel City Watchman left a message that I haven't been able to stop thinking about. He said he'd been an insomniac for 20 years until he realized his wakefulness wasn't a medical problem, but an invitation. He started praying for his city's power grid and the local police precinct every night at 2:15 a.m. He wrote that the heavy, fake sleepiness Arthur describes is exactly what he had to fight through for the first month. Arthur's account maps onto that comment almost perfectly. It's that same idea that the most important work happens when the rest of the world thinks the office is closed. The janitor kept praying, and the shockwaves kept hitting the hospital. It was like watching a heavy-duty battery being jumped back to life. "The third watch is coming," Jesus said. The sky over Lake Michigan was beginning to change, not to blue, but to a deep, bruised purple. The clock hand moved to 3 a.m. "This is the hour of the consecration," Jesus said. The atmosphere shifted again. The aggression of the midnight hour began to fade, replaced by a cold, calculating stillness. This was the hour when the rot started to solidify. It wasn't just smoke anymore. It was becoming a structure for the coming day. I saw the shadows in the boardrooms across the loop starting to file their reports. They were setting the stage for the morning's arguments, the morning's greed, the morning's road rage. "They are preparing the atmosphere for the sun," Jesus said. "But my people should be the ones deciding the climate." I thought about the word climate. In business, we talk about the corporate climate. We think it's just the mood of the office. I realize now it's a spiritual temperature. "I wake my children at 3 a.m. to take back the territory before the world wakes up," Jesus said. He showed me a businessman I recognized. He was a rival of mine, a man I'd always thought was lucky. I saw him sitting in his kitchen with a cup of coffee. He was quiet. He wasn't looking at his phone. He was speaking to the air. "Almighty God," the man said, "I consecrate this day to you. Open the doors that no man can shut. Let your favor go before me." As he spoke, I saw a literal path of gold light being paved in front of his car in the driveway. It stretched all the way to his office on LaSalle Street. "He isn't lucky, Arthur," Jesus said. "He's a watchman. He's clearing the road while you're still under the wool." I felt a sharp, stinging shame. I'd spent my life thinking I was the one making things happen. I thought my 5 a.m. gym sessions were the key to my success. I realized I was just a blind man walking on paths other people had cleared for me. "What about my path?" I asked. Jesus looked at me. His expression was unreadable. "Your path ended on a 62nd floor balcony, Arthur." I froze. The weight of the Lake Michigan air seemed to press into my chest. I remembered the scotch, the crystal glass, the cold railing. "But the lease hasn't expired," he added. Suddenly, the purple sky began to tear. I saw a brilliant, terrifyingly white light beginning to bleed through from the horizon. "Go back," Jesus said, "and this time, stay awake for the shift." The light didn't just fade, it slammed. 1 second, I was looking at the horizon of another world, and the next, I was choking on the smell of burnt hair and ozone. My chest didn't just hurt, it exploded. It was like someone had taken a sledgehammer to my sternum. I felt my back arch off the concrete rug of the balcony. My heels kicked out, scraping against the metal base of the outdoor table. "We got a rhythm! He's back!" The voice was screaming. It was right in my ear. I could feel hot breath on my neck. I tried to open my eyes, but the world was just a blur of blue and red strobes reflecting off the glass of the skyscraper. I coughed. It felt like I was hacking up pieces of glass. My throat was raw, and my tongue felt 3 sizes too big for my mouth. "Arthur? Arthur, can you hear me? Stay with us, pal." I felt hands on me. Rough, professional hands. They were lifting me onto a backboard. The movement made the world tilt. I looked up past the paramedic's shoulder, and for a split second, I didn't see the Chicago sky. I saw the grid again. I saw the gray smoke curling around the paramedic's head. "The shift," I wheezed. "Don't try to talk, Arthur. You've had a major cardiac event. We're getting you down to Northwestern." They moved me. The elevator ride felt like it took 3 years. Every floor we passed, I could feel the spiritual temperature of the building. On the 45th floor, I felt a sharp, icy prickle, the rot of a legal battle happening behind one of those doors. On the 12th floor, I felt a sudden, warm hum, Someone was praying in the accounting department. I was loaded into the ambulance. The sirens were a physical weight on my eardrums. I lay there, watching the ceiling of the rig, and all I could think about was Gregory's penthouse and the woman in Cicero. By the time we hit the ER, I was slipping again. Not into death, but into that hyper-alert state. The hospital was a battlefield. I saw nurses running, their faces tight with stress, and hovering right behind them were those faceless consultants of the dark, whispering about mistakes, about exhaustion, about giving up. I need to pray, I told a doctor as they wheeled me into the ICU. We're going to take care of that, Arthur. Just breathe. They didn't understand. I wasn't asking for a chaplain. I was trying to file a motion. I spent 4 days in that unit. My VPs came by. They brought flowers. They brought get well cards signed by the whole floor. They talked about the markets. They talked about the merger. I looked at Bill, my lead negotiator. He was sitting by my bed telling me how he'd handled the acquisition while I was out. I saw it, the gray stain on his fingers. Did you use the loophole, Bill? I asked. My voice was a ghost of what it used to be. Bill hesitated. He looked at his shoes. It was the only way to close, Arthur. You know how it is. It's just business. I closed my eyes. I could hear the vulture shrieking in the back of my mind. It's not just business, Bill. It's a breach. He didn't know what I was talking about. He thought the morphine was making me loopy. He patted my hand and told me to get some rest. But I knew. Now we're moving into the part of this account where Arthur had to figure out how to live in a world that he could suddenly see through. It's one thing to have a vision when you're clinically dead for 8 minutes. It's another to wake up at 3 a.m. in a Gold Coast high-rise and realize the office never actually closed. Arthur's transition from an executive to what he calls a night watchman changed the register of everything he did from that moment on. I went home on a Tuesday. The apartment felt different. The 62nd floor didn't feel like a victory anymore. It felt like a guard tower. I stood on the balcony, right where I'd fallen. There was still a faint stain on the rug from the scotch. I looked out at the city. It was 11 p.m. My body was exhausted. The doctors told me I needed 18 hours of sleep a day for the next month. My eyes were heavy. My brain was begging for the wool. Then I felt it, that nudge. It wasn't a sound. It was just a sudden, sharp clarity in my gut. Pray for the trading floor. Now. I looked at the duvet. I looked at the blackout curtains. The sleep of comfort, I whispered. I didn't go to bed. I sat in my leather chair, the one I used to use for reading over contracts. I closed my eyes and I started the 11 p.m. prayer. I prayed for the soul of the enterprise. I prayed for the protection of the integrity of every man and woman under my oversight. I felt the spirit of slumber hit me. It was like a physical wave of fog. My head dropped. I almost fell out of the chair. I bind the assignment, I rasped. I stayed up until 1 a.m. The next morning, I walked into the office. I didn't check the ticker first. I walked through the cubicles. I looked at the faces of my employees. I could see who was under the rot. I could see who was struggling with the sifting. I didn't fire them. I invited them into my office. I asked them how their families were. I listened for the whispers they were hearing, and I spoke against them. My board of directors thinks I've gone soft. They see the numbers staying steady, but that they don't like the new tone. They don't like that I've canceled 3 acquisitions because the climate felt wrong. I'm 59. I've lived my whole life thinking I was the chairman. I realize now I'm just a middle manager for a much larger operation. Every night I wait for the nudge, 11 p.m., midnight, 3 a.m. I don't mind the tiredness anymore. The tiredness is just the cost of doing business in a war zone. I sit in my chair looking out over the flickering lights of the loop and I wait. I'm trying to find the word for what I am now. It's not intercessor. That sounds too churchy, too passive. It's more like spiritual risk management. No, that's not it either. It's about the infrastructure, the things that hold the buildings up when the wind off the lake starts to scream. There's a specific kind of, I don't know. I just know I can't look at the Willis Tower the same way. I know that when the sun comes up over Wacker Drive, the real work has already been done by the people who didn't pull the covers up. I put my hand on the cold glass of my window. I can still feel the marble weight of that hand on my shoulder. I'm still here. I'm still on the clock. I just hope I'm not the only one in this city who's staying awake for the shift. I've been looking at the maps of the Chicago Underground lately, the freight tunnels, the old abandoned water lines that run beneath the streets. One detail in Arthur's account has been sitting with me since I first read it. He described the spiritual grid of the city as being thickest over the places where people were supposed to be safe, like the hospitals and the courtrooms. Most people who send accounts to near-death experiences talk about the beauty of what they saw, but Arthur stayed focused on the infrastructure. I keep coming back to that janitor he saw, the one in the high-rise near Wacker Drive. Arthur didn't know his name, and he didn't know what he was praying for. He just saw the shockwaves of light hitting a hospital 3 blocks away. It makes me wonder if the real history of Chicago isn't being written in the boardrooms at all. Maybe it's being decided in the 2 a.m. quiet of a maintenance closet on Wacker Drive.